Our final reading is again from the Gospel of Matthew. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way.
Let me add my welcome to Tom's. It's really good to be able to welcome you to St. Nick's Church for our morning carol service. I'm always on the lookout for good Christmas jokes. You can be the judge as to whether this is any good or not. It was just before Christmas. 3 men get into a lift, the Ritz Hotel. It's the 5th floor. 5 guys, the 3 guys that get in. An honest politician, an accountant with a sense of humour, and Father Christmas. As they travel down from the 5th floor to the ground floor, they notice a £50 note. And the question is, which one picks up the £50 note, hands it into reception? Well, the answer is obvious. It's Father Christmas, of course, because the other 2 don't exist. Well, as I said, I'm on the lookout for good Christmas jokes, so do tell me how to upgrade that afterwards, if you will. As we approach Christmas again this year, we're going to spend our time together just considering some of the facts of Christmas. I guess that reading we had just now is pretty well known, certainly at this time of year. The story of King Herod, the wise men, and of course, the infant child, Jesus. And for King Herod, it's fair to say the news of Jesus' birth, well, it's the most unwanted news ever. Herod is for sure the king who hated Christmas. And Matthew, the person who wrote down this account, he's one of the 12 disciples, knows Jesus, of course, very well as he grew up. He writes to highlight the tension between King Herod and this little baby. Verse 1, in the days of Herod the king. Verse 3, you get it again, when Herod the king heard this. But of course, the wise men came not to see him, even though they're being told twice in the narrative that Herod the king is there. They don't want to see that king. They come to Jerusalem to find out where, look at verse 2, where is he who has been born king? And immediately the tension is set. Herod, understandably, doesn't like the sound of another king around. You see that in verse 3, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. It's not that surprising. I mean, this new king presents a direct threat to his kingdom. And Matthew rubs salt into Herod's wound by referring to Jesus in the way that he does. I wonder if you notice the way that Jesus is spoken about here. Verse 2 again, where is he who has been born king of the Jews? That's a very significant way of referring to someone. In our country now, I mean, when Charles was born to Elizabeth, he was born to be king. That's very, very different. And he's been waiting for that for over 70 years, and he's going to carry on waiting with the way our Queen's going. But you see, Jesus isn't some minor royal. His kingship, exponentially different. King at the point of birth. Entitled to the throne, because the throne was always only his. You see, there are kings, and there is the king. Matthew was writing primarily to a Jewish audience in the first instance, and for hundreds of years they'd been waiting for the king. You probably heard him referred to as the Messiah, or the Christ, by the time the word's translated into the New Testament. Means the same thing, the king. All the time, the Bible anticipates the arrival of the king, and the point that's being made here, he's come. This is God's long-promised king. It's so easy, isn't it, just to sort of let the birth of Jesus blend into the background and let the festivities and the celebrations overtake and dominate. But I'd like to suggest that a thoughtful reading of the facts of Christmas simply just don't allow us to do that. Matthew wants us to see that when Jesus arrived, the world was shaken. And the point that he wants us to grasp as readers, even 2,000 years later, is that can't just be sort of pushed away or ignored. Yes, of course, Jesus is here presented as a little one. He's vulnerable. He needs the care of his parents. He needs a home to grow up in. He needs protection, not least from the evil King Herod. But all that blends into the background, actually. Matthew has a far grander agenda than the domestic details. This is really the promised king. And can I just suggest, if that's right, if that claim is legitimate, then wouldn't you expect some pretty fantastic things to accompany the arrival of the long-promised king? You'd expect some pretty big things to happen, wouldn't you? Let me turn that round. In fact, couldn't you go so far as to say, if amazing things didn't happen at the birth of Jesus, well, you feel shortchanged. You'd feel the whole thing was a bit of a scam. 2 points for us to consider on this carol service morning. The arrival of Jesus that first Christmas. First, our attention is demanded. Matthew's gospel is packed full of details about Jesus. We put a stack of these Matthew's gospels over at the back of the church. Do take one away if you'd like, quite free. You can read for yourself his account, the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. His teaching and miracles are amazing. His death and resurrection, you cannot but be gripped by the story as it's told. But even in these verses we've just heard read, some of these details stand out. They're meant to grab our attention. Look, for example, in the middle of the first verse again. I keep referring to verses. Just if you find the little numbers, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you find the little numbers within the reading, then you can check that what I'm saying is actually what Matthew wrote down. You see, Jesus is visited, middle of verse 1, by wise men from the east. That's an incredible detail. Remember, it's the ancient world. Travel was hard, expensive in those days. It wasn't an EasyJet that you jump onto. And these dignitaries from far, far away have come to declare their personal allegiance to an infant child. Despite what your Christmas cards may be showing you this year, we don't actually know how many wise men there were or what they traveled on. Those details aren't actually in the Bible. Clinton cards have decided that there were 3 men on 3 camels. I don't know where they got that information. It could have been 16 men on elephants. We don't know. The one detail that we are told, verse 1 again, they were from the east. That's the significant, the salient fact. Perhaps Babylon, Persia, we're guessing. The point is they were Asians. In the original language, if you really sort of drill into it, they obviously had a lot of means, with their great presence. They were obviously rich Asians. You could say very rich, crazy rich Asians, for sure. I'm sorry, that was gratuitous. I got teenagers, these things happen at home. But the point is, these wise men, this is the point to really grasp. These wise men were not Jewish. They were from out of town. And here's this little Jewish child demanding the attention, the adoration of wise men from another nation. Here are the finest minds of Asia risking their lives because of a small Jewish child. Here is Jesus, God's long-promised king. What that means, of course, is that Jesus is not just a a local king over some people some time that's now past. The implication of what Matthew is saying, of course, is that he's God's king over all people, over all time. From Alaska to Australia to Afghanistan, from Beijing to Bombay to Boston. Imagine spinning a globe. We've got a few at home. You sort of spin it round when you don't know what to do. Anywhere you stop it with your finger, whatever territory or land or sea, Jesus is the rightful king. That's the claim that's being made. These are attention-demanding details, and that's just the wise men. Consider also the details about this star. Look again at verse 2. The wise men say, "Where is he who has been born king of the Jews? For we saw his star. We've come to worship him." That is again meant to stand out as a little bit unusual. His star. I don't know how many of us would claim to have a star. Probably not many. In the first instance, the star led the wise men to the city of Jerusalem. It brought them generally there. They started to make inquiries. But then the star went further, right up to the house. You see that down in verse 9. In the middle there, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. We might go so far as to say Jesus had his own satellite GPS system. It brought these guests right to his front door. There have been a ridiculous number of attempts to try and explain this star away through natural means. The so-called theologians of our day spend great time saying, oh, it was probably a comet. These things happen. Special lightning. Northern lights, some have suggested. But again, just think of the logic of what's going on. Wouldn't you expect, if this really is God's king, wouldn't you expect a few fantastical things to happen? Our attention is demanded. To not have a flurry of miracles, as I said before, I just think we'd all feel that the whole thing was a bit of a scam, if it was just a birth like any other. Abraham Kuyper, he was one of the few honest politicians of his day. He went on to become Prime Minister of Holland back, I think it was about 1901. He was a committed Christian, and he said this: "There is not 1 square inch of the entire creation about which Jesus Christ does not cry out, 'This is mine, this belongs to me.'" Here is God's promised king, and his arrival demands our attention. But secondly, and more briefly, a response is invited. You see, our story does show a number of different responses to this king. Not surprisingly, you get a little bit of a range of different reactions. Back to the king that hated Christmas. You remember him, Herod? From his perspective, Jesus has to be taken out. Jesus has to be eliminated. He tries to trick the wise men. He tries to trick them into giving away the location so that he can also, he claims, worship the child too. Look at verse 8 there. "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." King Herod says, that's a load of hogwash, obviously. King Herod has no desire to worship. His true colors, of course, become clear very soon. A few verses after the reading we just had, amazingly, King Herod orders the extermination of every child of Bethlehem just to eliminate the threat. Herod's open hatred and fear of Jesus is rare in our world. But I guess his underlying attitude is typical, understandable. It's the attitude which wants nothing to do with Jesus, wants to push him out of our life. And I guess if Herod displays that first reaction to Jesus, a very sort of vivid hatred, well then the people of Jerusalem, we see the second reaction. It's a slightly easier to relate to reaction, I think. You see it in verse 3 there. "When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him." I guess if in Herod we see the aggressively hostile, well, in the people of Jerusalem, we see a more politically correct version of the same underlying attitudes. Greatly troubled now, but of course apathy, indifference would settle in. Either way, Jesus is pushed away. And there's a technical word that the Bible uses again and again. You may have heard it before, sin. That's all what sin really is. despite what you might have been told. Sin means to push Jesus away. Like the people then, well, all of us, it's fair to say every member of humanity, holds this trait. We'd rather not have the inconvenience of a king that we may not know much about that seems to have a claim on our life. Can I just say, if you're a guest here today at Carol Services, we often have lots of guests. I think probably we have lots of guests most Sundays. Lots of people come and look in and investigate the Christian faith. But can I just say that if you're one of those people today, I can see that some of these things that we're considering today may seem quite strange. After all, we may think, well, I've managed to coexist with the Christian faith all my life and celebrate Christmas quite happily without having to think about any of this. Why do we need to change anything today? But you see, if Jesus really is God's promised king, can I suggest we would be wise to find out what the king wants? He's not after a token gesture. He doesn't want lip service, that's for sure. He does actually have the right to rule. And he asks people to let him rule them. So let me just sort of, again, try and turn this around. What if Jesus was actually better at running my life than I am at running my life? What if he was a better decision maker in the things that really matter? It's worth just considering that for a moment. Think about it personally. Something to sort of mull on over Christmas, if you like. Who gets the right, ultimately, to run your life, make decisions in your life? Our government, certainly the last few days, is increasingly keen to give it a go again. We're going to see how that goes. But actually, when it comes to everyday choices, how do you decide what you will do, who you will listen to? We all want freedom, don't we? We want freedom to run our lives in a way that suits us. And it is right that we have that freedom to choose. It is absolutely right. In fact, that's one of the things I've mentioned, the one honest politician I am aware of, Abraham Kuyper. He's long dead, I'm afraid. But he believed passionately in what I've just said. Principled pluralism, I believe he called it. Freedom and protection for different religions to exist alongside each other. And that is a good thing. That is right. Real freedom. Apparently, the White House, even today, allows a corner for each religion and faith to decorate its beliefs through the holiday season. That's a good thing, isn't it? Even the atheists get a corner, which intentionally remains empty. Is that great? But in the end, you have to decide. To whom, ultimately, do you belong? Are you a law to yourself? Do you exist for your own pleasure? To whom will you have to give an account, if anyone? You see, Jesus' arrival 2,000 years ago, it challenges indifference and indecision. If he really is God's long-promised king, then our reaction to Jesus today matters. It becomes personal. I can't wait. All of us here at St. Nick's, there's a large church family here. We love Christmas, and we're going to make a big thing about celebrating it. If you happen to be in London, join us on Christmas Day. My wife, Carrie, some of you will know, is going to be sort of leading a little team cooking after Christmas lunch. We love it all. And we'll be having a big Christmas lunch up and down here with everybody that's sort of stuck in London for Christmas. So you'd be very welcome to join us for that. Celebrations are important, aren't they? And some of the traditions that we hold on to, the turkey and the trinkets and the tinsel, all of that, it's great stuff. You can picture the scene sort of towards the end of the meal that will take place here. We'll all be pulling crackers, and the Americans will be saying, "What are they?" And we sort of pull the crackers and read out those ridiculous jokes, which are probably better than the one that I started with, and exchange the trinkets and all that sort of stuff. And we put the crowns on our head, and we carry on celebrating Christmas. Well, in life, of course, we all wear our crown in the sense that we have the desire to be in charge. Becoming a Christian means very simply recognizing that Jesus and not me has the right to run my life. That sort of rather quaint illustration with all of us sort of wearing our crowns. Of course, what it means is that Jesus has the right to wear the crown over my life. I think that's quite a humbling experience. Ultimately, Christianity will knock pride out of you. But the more I think about this king, the more there is to attract me to him. Remember, he was born king. It was a role designed for him that ultimately means he has power over everything and everyone. But as you follow the life of Jesus, even more spectacular than his birth, which was attention-grabbing, is his death. He chose to go to the cross. That wasn't a mistake. He intentionally went up to Jerusalem to deal with my sin. That's incredible. He knew that I had a problem, and he went to Jerusalem to deal with it. The very thing that lies right at the heart of our desire to be independent from God. The very thing that makes us want to keep that crown on in our life. Jesus went to the cross to die for that. So the response that's invited, using that illustration one last time, it's like taking the crown of my life off and placing it at Jesus' feet. And in fact, our story in Matthew that we heard read, it closes with the wise men doing just that, figuratively speaking. Verse 11, going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Jesus would have been about 2 by this stage. What do the wise men do? First, they fall down, perhaps to their knees in the first instance, and then they worship. That means they would have fallen down right flat, sort of prostrated themselves before a 2-year-old with a rattle. It's an incredible picture, isn't it? And that means, of course, they are lowering themselves to a position of humility. They offer lavish gifts. The message is clear. What I am, all that I have, I offer to you, Jesus. Well, there's the challenge for us to think about this Christmas. A few things to sort of mull on and take away. In the end, that's ultimately the right reaction. Let me take this final opportunity to wish you a very happy Christmas. Look forward to chatting to you afterwards, and I'm going to hand back to Tom now.